It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Richard Ryan is a professor at the Institute for Positive Psychology and Education at the Australian Catholic University and a research professor at the University of Rochester. He's been a clinical psychologist for I'm not going to say how many years it's been, but we'll just say since the 1970s. The author of more publications than just about anybody on the planet. In fact, my understanding, Professor Ryan, is that you are the most cited psychology scholar on the planet right now. Is that correct?
The living, I guess, yeah.
the most cited living.
As long as I'm alive, Justin, I think that's probably true.
You're a big deal, is what I'm trying to say. There's very few people on the planet who know what you know, and in fact, probably nobody. And it's just such an honor to be able to spend some time with you. Thank you. Where does this conversation find you?
Right now I'm in Sydney. I'm in my neighbor's apartment because my wife is doing yoga in our apartment next door.
Well, you have a wonderful wife and great neighbors. That's great. The reason I wanted to talk to you is because the theory of motivation and well-being that you have developed since the 1970s with your collaborator, Professor Ed Deasy, is called self-determination theory, and it's really at the very foundation of everything that I teach. There's pretty much nothing that I talk about that doesn't trace its way back to self-determination theory. And people often say, where do these ideas come from? What's this really all about? This is, I guess, at the very heart of the stuff that I teach and the stuff that I think makes the biggest difference in families. So what I thought I'd do today in this conversation is just ask you a bunch of questions and get you to talk us through it from a parenting point of view, because I mean, you're the guy. You're the guy that I learned from, and I would love to introduce other people to you. I want to start by talking about something that's been extremely topical in Australia in recent times, and that's the issue of gendered violence. We've got a tremendous amount of noise rightly being made about men and boys behaving extremely badly, not just hurting, destroying, and even killing women specifically. But men don't just do that to women. They do it to one another, and they also do it to themselves. We really have a massive problem when it comes to men and violence, men and harm. Are there any things that you think parents need to know so that they can reduce the likelihood that their children are going to grow up and be disrespectful, be hurtful, perform these denigrating acts on those around them?
First of all, I just want to express my sadness and my sympathies for everybody who's been a victim of this violence. You know, here in Sydney, I think everybody's still processing what happened at Bondi Junction and the murders that happened there. And of course, we've seen this not just in Australia, but in many countries around the world. There's a tremendous amount of violence against women, and it's a problem that definitely needs addressing. When you look at perpetrators of violence, usually they have a particular kind of background where they've experienced a lot of frustration, a lot of rejection, a lot of themselves unhappiness in life. This doesn't come from nowhere. What our research shows is that aggression is usually a result of chronic kind of frustration of basic psychological needs. And so on the other side of it, the people who don't commit violence are people who've grown up in loving families, who felt the support of other people, who have some place to go when they are troubled with what's going on. So aggression is really the result of a lot of social harms that have been done to people for the most part. I mean, there are cases, of course, of certain kinds of disorders that might result in aggression that we can talk about separately from that. But in terms of a parenting perspective, aggressive, violent people don't come typically from loving homes where they've had a lot of support from their parents.
So you've just used a couple of terms that I think are really important to describe, and I talk about this a lot. So long-time listeners will be familiar with those terms, but I'd love to get it in your words. You mentioned that those who come from loving homes are raised in an environment where their basic psychological needs are supported. And you've highlighted that those who do harm are more likely to come from homes where those basic psychological needs have not been supported. Could you describe what you mean by basic psychological needs, and also maybe talk about the difference between need support and need frustration?
Sure. In self-determination theory, we argue that across humanity, we all have some basic psychological needs in the same way we have some basic physical needs. And those needs include a need for relatedness, to feel like we're connected and we belong in our social groups, that we're loved and cared for, and that we're able to care for others. So that's really the basic need for relatedness. A need for competence, which is a sense in which You can feel mastery over the things that are important in your life and not feel overly evaluated, criticized, put down, or otherwise treated as a failure. So the need for competence is really that sense of mastery that everybody needs. And the need for autonomy, which is pretty central to our theorizing, is the need to feel volitional in what you're doing, willing to do what you're doing. And people who have autonomy are able to pursue things that interest them and feel intrinsic motivation for many of the activities they're engaged in, but also, even when they're not intrinsically motivated or enjoying activities, that they value what they're doing. So they've internalized a set of values that they really truly embrace and can pursue them. And the opposite of autonomy is heteronomy, feeling controlled, pushed around, pressured, otherwise not having volition over what you're doing. So when people can experience autonomy, competence, and relatedness, they feel whole and well, and then they have the energy to be constructive in life. But when they feel like their autonomy is thwarted, when they feel overly controlled, overly micromanaged, when they feel rejected so that they lack relatedness, or when they feel really put down and overly evaluated and their competence is crushed, these are the things that really hurt mental health.
If I'm a parent and I'm hearing this conversation, and I want to make sure that my son grows up to have a real sense that the support is at home, what are the things that I'm doing wrong? What are the things that you see most that parents are, with the very best of intentions, actually overstepping and undermining rather than supporting those basic psychological needs?
I'm not sure I can pinpoint a particular thing. What I would say is, you want to have a listening ear for your children. You want to know what's going on in their lives. You want to be in a way that's not evaluative and judgmental, but really open to trying to understand their experiences and then be able to talk those through. One of the things I would want my child to be able to do is to come home and talk to me about the pressure they feel under from peers, or the fears that they have about, being rejected by others. Not so that I can solve that problem for them, but they can feel like somebody understands what's going on for them. So I think the first and most important thing, especially in the kind of ages we're talking about, is a listening ear, is a sympathetic, empathic parent who's not trying to control behavior as much as understand it and help guide their kids in the right directions. And when I say guidance, I mean that means, providing some rationale, providing some understanding, and modeling the right values. Again, I think if you've seen young males who are victimizing women, I want to look to the home and say, what are they seeing as modeling? What are they exposed to themselves? What kind of treatment goes on in the interpersonal relationships that have been right in front of them their whole lives? Again, I don't think these things come from nowhere.
Richard Ryan is a professor at the Institute for Positive Psychology and Education at the Australian Catholic University and a research professor at the University of Rochester. Have you listened to Kyle and Jackie O on the radio?
No.
Kyle and Jackie O are Australia's number one radio duo.
Mm-hmm.
Their content between 6...
I'm already afraid.
Between 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning, 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning, they regularly have conversations that are deeply sexualized. They'll talk about, and forgive me for being so crass, but they'll talk literally about every kind of sexual behavior you can. Last week, our executive producer for this podcast sent me some of their content, and they were talking about completely explicit interactions with strangers on dance floors in nightclubs, really sexualized, really objectified kind of conversations. They are the number one breakfast duo in the country with more than 1 million daily listeners.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you can talk to me about what kind of impact that sort of content or explicit content online or the degraded and increasingly coarse content that appears even in movies that are oriented towards children and young people.
Yeah.
Even if kids come from a family or a home where their basic psychological needs are generally well supported, how does that impact their beliefs and their subsequent behaviors? But to what degree can we blame media, the super peer, the internet, Netflix, podcasts that they're explicit, social media? Can we be pointing the finger in that direction, or does it really just come back to values taught at home and the internalization of those values? Full stop. End of story.
Well, you bring up a lot of issues kind of simultaneously there, but the first thing I would agree with is that our children today are exposed to a kind of sexuality and explicitness that probably a lot of us didn't have to experience when we were young. We couldn't get access to the same kind of content, and it was prevented. And I do think that that has harmful effects on children's development. They're saying things before they have the cognitive, emotional, even physical capacities to really understand what's going on there. So I do think that that's harmful. And this makes it all the more important that parents are in a place where they can talk to their children about the issues that they're exposed to and help give them a kind of guiding light through the morass of information that comes their way. First, I think, for my own children, for any parent, I think we want to kind of minimize the exposure to these things. And then that means setting some limits around the use of media and what they get exposed to, and doing that with a kind of compassion and rationale for understanding kids have curiosity. They want to go certain places, but they're not ready for it yet. And that's some place where I think parent limit setting comes into play. At the same time, that exposure is going to happen because of the pervasiveness that you speak of right there, which is it's hard to get away from it. It's everywhere. And that's something I think, requires some parental conversation and some, guidance with respect to, and particularly objectification of women. And this is something both for girls and boys, the being objectified, the playing into the objectification for girls, the treatment and ideation around girls and women for boys. These are topics that I think are worth parents paying attention to when they see it, addressing it, when they see the exposure to it, like when you're watching a show together and you see it. That's a good opportunity for conversation, I think, and for discussion.
I was having a conversation just the other day with a young woman. I think she's in maybe grade 10, 15, 16 years of age. And she was on TikTok, and I asked her how she dealt with the coarseness and just all the language and all the explicit content that comes through. So many of these social media sites are just a sewer. And she said, it's not that bad compared to what happens in the playground.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that the environment, we talk about basic psychological needs, and specifically that relatedness need, feeling like you can connect with others, feeling like you belong and you matter. And yet a school playground, it doesn't feel like it's a very safe place for a lot of people. And it feels like there's a lot of push on the part of others, mainly boys, to do more and more extreme things to demonstrate their belonging, to demonstrate that they're part of the crew, to be in.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you have any general reactions to this idea. I mean, the more I think about it, the more I think parenting is just, we live in a postmodern world where morality is not supposed to be a thing, but parenting is fundamentally a moral endeavor, isn't it?
Well, I think teaching children morality is a part of parenting, and I think it's essential, and it begins, from the beginning, and it becomes even more complex as kids get into adolescence and they're trying to shape an adult identity. So I think parents have a strong role in that. And what you're talking about is for that young girl is having resilience with respect to the things that come at her. And again, resilience comes not from having this adversity befall you, but from having support so that you have some place to go, some place to discuss, some place to receive empathy for these things. Also, because what you want is for her, for others to be able to stand up and say, I don't tolerate that kind of treatment. I don't want to be treated that way. Make it uncool for the boys who do that. That's a resilient response, but that takes some courage, and that takes kind of character building that parents do help shape.
That was something that as soon as you said it, I thought, how do we get our kids to that point? I mean, it feels as though it's overwhelming that almost all the boys are buying into this. They're overwhelmingly.
I do want to. I want to correct you there at least a little bit. Most boys are not super aggressive.
No. That's what I was going to say. It feels like it because there's so much noise being made by this group. Overwhelmingly, we know that many of them are consuming explicit content, but outside of that, it just feels like it feels like it's a tsunami of unhealthy masculinity rolling at all of our kids, including the healthy ones. And how many healthy ones are out there? It's hard to know because it's so hard to get them to stand up and be courageous enough to say, hey, that's not okay. We don't tolerate that here, because they must be terrified that they're going to get absolutely rolled by this wave of unhealthy, primarily boys, that are doing this to everybody around them.
I think there's a lot of modeling of toxic masculinity. It's true. There's also modeling of mature and giving and loving masculinity as well. And we just want to make sure that the preponderance that we're showing as men, this latter direction. But, I think we hear about every negative event. We're exposed to news media that wants clicks, that wants us to pay attention. And of course, the more noxious the story, the more outrageous the behavior, the more likely it's going to be on the news or in the documentaries or in the morning show at breakfast, because those people are trying to command attention, and these things are attention grabbers. But that doesn't mean it's the normative way in which people act. I think if you look at most interactions on the playground, they're not all noxious. They're not all this kind of a sexual abusive stuff that we're talking about. Those things do happen, and we shouldn't be naive about that. But we shouldn't characterize it. That's the kind of normative behavior going on with kids. That kids are not pounding each other every day. Kids are not beating each other up every day. Most kids are pretty social. They want to be cooperative. They want to be, kind to others. I think that's the norm. But what we see in the media is every kind of malevolence that the media can dig up, find, and put in our faces.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing that makes you think, maybe I should just turn the media off and concentrate on what's happening in my living room.
I do, yeah, because I think most of us, if we look more immediately, our kids tend to be good kids, and we want to protect them as much as we can. And when we see these horrible things happening in the media, it is terrifying to a parent saying, oh, look what my kid's exposed to every day.
Professor Richard Ryan is a professor at the Institute for Positive Psychology and Education at the Australian Catholic University and a research professor at the University of Rochester. I've got so many of your books on my shelves, and they're all the really big ones. They're the ones that are like 800 pages or more.
I really apologize for that.
and I've read most of them as well. And yet to sit here and talk with you has just been such a delight. And I really hope that the things that we've talked about have made a difference for parents who have been listening. Thank you for being so generous with your time and sharing what you've shared.
Happy to do it, Justin. Thanks.
The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. For more information about making your family happier, please visit us at happyfamilies.com.au.